Welcome everyone. It is a few minutes past the top of the hour and we are live from California to Ireland for our next CWR Academy webinar. So welcome, depending where you are, good morning or good afternoon or good evening. So welcome to CWR Academy and this webinar, Achievements in Electronic Media, Electronic and Print Media. And I'd like to just welcome you. I'm Robert Cogswell from the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange and a member of the CWR board. So before we get into our format for the hour, I would like to just start off with a quick Advent prayer. So we should be switching screens for a moment, so bear with me as I share my screen. This is borrowed from jesuitresource.org. Lord Jesus, Master of both the light and the darkness, send your Holy Spirit upon our preparations for Christmas. We, who have so much to do and seek quiet spaces to hear your voice each day, we, who are anxious over many things, look forward to your coming among us. We, who are blessed in so many ways, long for the complete joy of your kingdom. We, whose hearts are heavy, seek the joy of your presence. We are your people, walking in darkness, yet seeking the light. To you we say, come, Lord Jesus. Amen. So thank you. Thank you for joining us today. And we want to respond to the needs of our membership with these CWR Academy webinars. And to that effect, the reason behind this particular webinar is that we've heard from many of you that we want to hear more panels and best practices, and that we also did not get to hear from our several award winners from the 2020 conference. So we are going to start doing that today. Here we are. It is a Zoom webinar. It's different from a flash conversation, so you're only seeing the panelists and the screen shares that they'll be doing. We're not seeing all the different attendees who are watching today. And it is being recorded, so the session is being recorded for later viewing via CWR's website. In case you have to duck out or you want to recapture what was said, you can revisit our presentations that are happening today. We would like to encourage you to ask questions. So obviously you're familiar with the Zoom tray by now. You've got a chat button and a Q&A button down below. You can certainly ask questions of the presenters as we go. And if it makes sense, we may interrupt the presentations here and there, but we'll try and minimize that to kind of keep the flow of the presentations going and share a little time for Q&A at the end of each presentation. So we'll strive to go with the flow during our time together, but try and answer all your questions as well. And if for some reason we can't get to all the questions, can't answer all the questions today, each of our presenters today have offered to share their email to follow up, any unanswered questions. So without further ado, I would like to welcome from the Congregation of St. Joseph, based in Cleveland, Ohio, Gina Sullivan, the Director of Communications, and Elizabeth Powers, their Electronic Communications Manager, who were recognized for outstanding achievement in print media. And we can walk with them through the creation of their magazine, imagineONE. So take it away, Gina and Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Rob. That was such a nice introduction. I feel like I won an Academy Award or something. Hi, everybody. And thanks, Brian, as well for setting up the Zoom. We're happy to be here, Elizabeth and I, and want to thank again CWR for this recognition of our magazine, which we pour a lot of ourselves and time and love and energy into. So we're happy to be here to kind of just go over our process and how we make this magazine happen twice a year. So just to get started, and I don't want to go into a huge history lesson, but this magazine was started in 2007 when our congregation reconfigured. We had 7 different locations who all had 7 different publications that ranged anywhere from a simple newsletter to a magazine. So all of those had to kind of go away. We had to create a new logo, a new website, a new everything. So when we first started imagining and visioning for what this magazine or publication would be, we knew it had to represent the whole congregation, all of our geography. We didn't want it to be regional, and we didn't want it to be like a newsletter. So in the past, the newsletters that were regional had things like jubilees and jubilarians and obituaries. We don't have that in Imagine One. We do create little local newsletters that go to each of our areas of presence, and those newsletters have that information in it. What Imagine One seeks to do is sort of address bigger issues and content. So it ranges anywhere from justice, big justice issues that we support as the congregation. Obviously, faith and spirituality is in each and every issue in one way or another. Sister stories, associate stories, and some ministry stories if it is in the context of a larger issue. We don't just do ministry profiles per se in Imagine One. Those would probably be more in our little local newsletters, if that makes sense. And obviously the name Imagine One comes from the CSJ, SSJ charism of unity. That's where that name came from. Our print run, each issue is just a little over, I just looked right before this, a little over 26,000, which was cut significantly from 2 years ago. As you can imagine, each issue is either 28 or 32 pages. I am going to go over to our website page in a minute so you can see the publication, but it's full color and it is quite costly. So we did cut our list down quite a bit about 2 years ago using different parameters. So now we're at about 26,000, which is a little more manageable. We also do send it digitally to anyone who requests it that way. And we're getting a lot more of those. So that's good. The more we can cut our list, and the less we have to print. Less paper and ink too. It's environmental. So each issue, it's a 3-part process. And what I'm going to talk about and then throw over to Elizabeth. The first part is what we call the editorial ideas team meeting. Everybody has some sort of planning process for a magazine like this, and we call ours the editorial ideas team. And it is made up of about 10 people. It's been a little more in the past, but they're from all over the congregation. So we try to represent different things. Some are sisters, some are staff, some are associates. We've even had people come in who are from ministries. So we try to get different viewpoints. And what we do over the course of 2 days when we're together, it's usually a noon to noon. So it's not a full 2 days. It's more like 1 day, but noon to noon. We strategize and talk about what is going on in our congregation, in the larger church, and in the country and world. And we just try to project ourselves out because we only come out twice a year. Sometimes we're projecting out about what this magazine is going to hit in 4 or 5 months. So sometimes we don't hit the mark. I mean, it's hard to tell. You can't predict the future, but we do try to figure out our content based on what we think is happening and going on in the country. This has obviously been very challenging this year because no one knew. I mean, we had a magazine that came out in March that had not one word about COVID or pandemic in it because it was planned and went to print before any of that, but we do our best. So that is the editorial ideas team. It is a really good process. I think it helps us a lot rather than it just being staff driven. It's really good to get that input, and we have so much geography, and it's very helpful to us because we don't always know everything that's going on in all the different locations. So that's really helpful to us. We also try to decide while we're thinking about themes for articles and topics, we also try to assign writers, people we think we know who know the topic, who could, be a good writer. And we do have a stable of good writers. It is getting more difficult. I will just be, honest and upfront about that. It is getting more difficult as sisters age. They're just not always able to write like they used to. We have sisters that, just can't do it anymore. So I feel like the list is getting smaller, but we've done some interesting things to sort of make up for that. We're involving a lot more associates, staff, and sometimes outside writers. So I'm gonna stop there and throw over to Elizabeth, because she is going to talk about the writing process and the editing process, and they'll come back to me and we'll talk about layout and design. So Elizabeth.
Thanks so much, Gina. I'm Elizabeth Powers. I work with Gina, and I work on the front end of the magazine, the editing and writing process. So I'm going to share my screen with you here. I've put together just a few notes about what we do. So give me 1 second here. Okay. In terms of the writing and editing process. So the first thing we do, I work with Eileen Beal, who is our editor for the magazine, and we work to get the writers together ready to write for the magazine. So one of the first things we do when we're looking at writers is we make sure to provide a detailed synopsis for what kind of articles we want from them. So often the writers who we're asking to write for imagineONE, some of them have been at the table for the editorial ideas team meeting that Gina was just talking about, but some of them haven't. And a lot of ideas and content come from that meeting. So we really try to provide them a good idea of where the idea for this article came from and what we're really looking for, so they have a good pathway to take when they're writing this article. The other thing we do, Gina mentioned, it's getting harder sometimes to find writers who are wanting to write, are good at writing, and also have the expertise we might need in a certain area. If we want to talk about an environmental issue, say, we want a sister who's really been on those front lines, she might not be a writer by nature. So sometimes we consider pairing them with either a staff member or another writer who's in the editorial ideas team to support them. And that can really be a big help for us if we're looking for writers outside of our normal sort of writing pool who have different expertise. The other important thing is to give them reasonable deadlines for us. We really try to give our writers enough time to write, but also enough time for us to edit and work with them after the fact. Deadlines are a struggle, I think, for everybody, right? And so making sure you give everyone the time they need is really important for us. And we also provide our writers with really clear expectations, especially if they haven't written for us before. Their articles are going to be edited, right? And for some people, that's new for them, or it's not something they've experienced before. So when we're working with our writers, we try to really be clear about what those expectations are, and that we're going to work with them through this process, and very likely are going to edit their articles down for us. Another thing we try to do for Gina and for the help of the whole magazine is we always try to request photos when possible at this early stage of working with the writers. This is especially important if a writer is involved in a ministry or involved in some kind of project. If we don't have those pictures, we want to ask them up front, do they have them? Can they get them for us? Or can they tell us who might have photos that we might want to use in the magazine? As you can imagine, sometimes getting high-res photos of these things that have happened that maybe we didn't know about beforehand, or an article comes to light after the fact is really important. So we try to start working on that right away as well, so that when we get to the end, we have sort of some of that material also, not just the writing. The other thing is we're always prepared to ask for a rewrite, right? Sometimes that's really tricky. We're working with sisters. Sometimes you're working with your boss and you have to say, this article didn't quite hit the way we want it to. So we try to establish these really close relationships with our writers where they understand that we might come back at them and say, what you wrote was really great, but it didn't quite hit the mark that we're trying to get for the magazine. Let's talk through what the original idea was and try again. And so that's something we're always ready for when it comes to writing as well. And then the other thing we do is we consider other sources of content. As Gina mentioned, sometimes it's hard to find a writer for a specific area. And often we can use content that we already have and that someone has already written for us. For us, that's often our blog. We have a blog called Beyond the Habit. And while it has a decent following, our print following is much wider, right? We actually have a lot of people who maybe don't use technology as much, so they wouldn't have seen it in any of our other ways that we share that. So sometimes we'll use content from things like the blog that a sister has already written and repurpose and reformat it for imagineONE. So there are a lot of different ways that we work with our writers or find writing that's going to fit the content of the magazine. So Eileen and I work together. She works more directly with the writers, and then we work together into editing the articles. For us, what that means is as soon as Eileen gets the articles and feels pretty good about it with the writer, it comes to me, and her and I talk about it. We talk through it and decide, does this need a lot of editing, a little editing? You know, where is this sitting at right now? One of the things we do is we keep an editorial style sheet. For us, that's really important. We want the magazine from magazine to magazine to sort of be consistent, right? So I know a lot of people keep style sheets for things like font and colors. We also keep an editorial one. For us, this is important because we have so many ministries. We want to make sure we're addressing the ministries the same way or correctly every time. You know, is sister capitalized or lowercase? All those kinds of things in one style sheet so that we can check back and make sure we're being consistent from magazine to magazine. And then with editing, you know, for me, it's read, and read it again. I typically do 2 read-throughs before I touch it. And then I talk to Eileen. We talk over what I think we're going to do to it. Then I do sort of a first edit of clarity. We're always trying to keep our reader in mind and making sure that the article is going to be clear for them and gives forth what we want it to give forth. I'm sure all of you know sometimes when you're working with writers, especially sister writers, they might use language that our general reader isn't familiar with. And our list is really broad. It's sisters and associates and staff, but it's also donors, some of whom might have a theological background and some of whom might be farmers who, you know, own a parcel of land that we used to own somewhere. So we want to really make sure that it's a clear read for them. So I read through and edit for that first before going back and double checking for errors and editorial style. That way I make sure both of those things are in sync. Keep the reader in mind. If making major edits, we do check back with our writers if we've really sort of rewritten large chunks of the piece, but we're also really clear with them, again, that, you know, we feel pretty strongly about certain parts that we've changed, but we want them to see it. We want them to feel comfortable with what's going out. We use more than one set of eyes whenever possible. Eileen and I read through first before any edits are made. And then after I make final sort of clerical error edits, Gina and Pat Millennius, who is also on our staff, see it as well. So the more eyes who can see these articles, the better. After I've read it, you know, 7 times, I might not see something anymore. And so we try to make sure plenty of people are reading these. And then we also always do a final edit once the articles are placed in layout, because as things change, things get shifted, we might have missed something. You know, maybe a title changed along the way and something got misplaced or misspelled. So even when we think it's all done, I do a final line-by-line edit to try to make sure we're not missing any of those important things that could have changed along the way. So that's sort of how we write and edit imagineONE. And I am going to go ahead and stop my share and send it back to Gina to talk a little bit about the layout process. So Gina.
Can we toss a couple of questions your way?
Sure.
Just, one question from Tammy Townsend Denny, is it possible to share a sample of your editorial style sheet?
Oh, sure, I'd be happy to do that. It's in a Word document. Rob, what would be the best, do you want me to show it, or what would be the best way?
Well, if you have an opportunity while Elizabeth is responding to bring it up and be able to screen share it, that could be helpful.
Sure, let me find it for you.
Okay, and then one other question that came up from me. Do you have a word count that you give your writers?
So we do, depending on the article. That's a good question. You know, and depending on the article, it's normally 500 to 1,500 words if it's a longer article. However, again, we do always tell them that we might edit it down. I always say I'd rather have a little bit more than not enough, and I feel pretty confident that I can always edit out things we don't need, but I'd rather have my writers give me more than less. It's just easier to go back to them and say, here's what we cut, than to ask them to add more in. So that's typically where we start.
Thank you for letting me interrupt.
No, of course. And I'm going to give you the style sheet here. because I do have it right here.
Isn't it, can't you attach it to the chat or no? For people?
I don't know about that, Gina, to be honest. I'm not sure.
No, you know what? I know I've seen people put links in there. I'm not sure you can put an attachment in
Yeah,
there.
since it's a Word document. So this is an example. Let me share with you here. Share screen. Where's my Word? Here it is. So for us, for example, here's just a couple things on the first page. We have LaGrange Park as one of our areas of presence, and we want to make sure that there's a space between La and Grange, you know, these kind of things. We have two St. Joseph's Academy, one in Baton Rouge and one in Cleveland, and they're spelled completely differently. So we always double check to make sure we have the right one and the right spelling. Special words like imagineONE is always italicized and uppercased. You know, sisters for us is always lowercase unless it's talking about a specific sister. So these are the kinds of things I keep in a Word document so that when I go through and do those hard line edits, I can check for all of these little individual things as I go without having to look back and say, hey, what did we do last time? When we had Father James Martin, did we spell out father or was it Father FR? You know, so this way I can sort of have those big things all in one place.
I think the one at the end there, Elizabeth, charism.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's really important because we don't say it externally. I think probably a lot of you don't. We say mission.
Mm-hmm.
It's such an internal word.
And that's one of those internal words our sisters are always using. So I always find those and change them to mission or reword the sentence in such a way to make sense for our external audience. Absolutely. All right. Thank you.
I want to give one example of the reread, read, and reread because I'll just let you decide on this. We had an issue that went out that was talking about the landmines, okay, that were in a certain country that have maimed and killed a lot of people. And they're called IEDs. But we printed in imagineONE exploding IUDs. So that was a fun one for us.
I feel the need to say that that was before I was editing the magazine. It's very important for me to say that.
Yeah. Okay, now I'm going to share my screen with our publications page from our website. So this is the page that has all of our imagineONE issues. The current one obviously is large and on top. And then down below are those little local newsletters I told you about. These only come out once a year, but they're about 12 pages and they're all for all of our areas of presence, and just that part of our mailing list gets those. So that's where you're going to find littler stories. But imagineONE, we use something called Flipbook. So when you get to, if you click on any of our issues, so this page is always the same. The contents page, we do have little departments, I like to call them. So they change sometimes from issue to issue, but it kind of is just a way to categorize articles and make sense for the reader a little bit. And then we always have an on the cover, and this cover was something we found on Etsy, which we just loved. This page is always a letter from one of our leadership team members. This page is always whatever great photo we have or have gotten in the past few months, we like to include on this page was just a little blurb. And then it goes into the larger, somehow I skipped a bunch of pages. So here is one article that was about how we've been responding to COVID in the past year. And we just loved that they did this in our LaGrange Park Center. So this just worked out really well for that issue, for that photo. Sometimes we get, as Elizabeth was saying, sometimes we get what I call editorial type photos of the actual content. Lots of times we don't, and we have to just sort of fill in with things like infographics, which are very good. And it's been shown, if you look at data, older people can really absorb information from infographics really well. And a lot of our mailing list is older people. So this is, hold on. This is our sisters who have taken vows. And this was called Answering the Call. It is not by accident that this spread right here is where our envelope was. People love seeing new vocations. And so I'm always very aware of what article is on the middle spread, which is where we put our donor envelope. This was I love this little sequence here. I got all these photos of her reaction to Sisters, and I just decided to do a little film strip, which I love. Another sister who took vows. This is another young sister talking about her journey. This was a voting, probably a lot of you did voting articles, how to vote, principles of Catholic social teaching. This was a very, very good article. Racism is a pandemic too. This was a big issue. There was a lot of big issues this year. You know, I know all of you were trying to react to that as well. And then on the final spread of the magazine, there's always a reflection. So this is always the same, and it's just different reflections. We like to sort of like the local news always ends on a happy story. We always try to end our issue in a positive, spiritual way. And then just to allude to that digital, this is on the back cover. If you would prefer to receive a digital copy instead, you know, this is how to do it. Email us here. And we do get a lot of emails. And then this is a vocations campaign that we came up with that we used on the back cover as an ad. So that is imagineONE. I don't want to cut into Lisa's time too much. Let me stop sharing. Do we have time for any questions or?
We do have a question already. There may be a few more coming, so feel free to add more questions, folks in the audience. But one asks, if you don't mind sharing this information, what the size of your mailing is and how is your response rate in terms of dollars raised?
Well, I can tell you that our mailing list is just over 26,000, the printed ones. The digital copies, I don't really know how many digital copies. That's more Christy. I'd have to ask Christy, somebody who does that. And what we receive in, oh, I haven't looked at those numbers in a while. Pat would know that. Let me look at that and I'll see if I can find some data. And maybe how about this? I'll email it out.
And I'm looking right now. I can tell you our digital as well.
All right, as I check for that information, are there any other questions out there?
While we wait for a second to see it, one other thing I will say that I didn't mention that I think is important when you see Gina scrolling through is I think when Gina puts together our layout, she does a really nice job of, we talked about photos, and she mentioned infographics, but the importance of all those different elements together, I think make for a really helpful magazine. If it's all one or the other, it's less enticing to our audience. And so that's really helpful. But also, I thought to myself as she was flipping, while we're pretty clear on our editorial process, it's also so important for us to be flexible. Sometimes we get to the end of the magazine and one of us ends up writing a page of something important that came up. So it sounds great to have a editing schedule, but you also have to be really flexible while you're doing that. So.
And you know, we all have the experience of getting a pretty good photo that's 28K or a terrible photo that's 8 meg. And so it's very frustrating sometimes because, you know, you're trying to go back to people who don't necessarily, I can't tell you how many times I've told people how to send me a photo from their phone and select actual size instead of small or whatever those, and they're like, well, that doesn't come up. Oh, they don't have an iPhone. Oh, you know, it's like, so then I don't know really how to tell them to send it to me. And we don't have professional photographers everywhere. So it is a combination of trying to do what we can with the photos we get and then filling in with more graphic photos. And like I said, graphics and infographics. So yeah, that's where that is. But I'm still looking for that information. I know I have a sheet somewhere.
Okay, well, maybe we can come back to that at a later time, or in the follow-up to the webinar, we can maybe get that specific question answered. One thing I wanted to ask you, Gina, in those infographics. Are you using any specialty tools to create that, or maybe just in InDesign, or how are you using your creativity to put those together?
I do have an infographic tool, but the one I just showed you, I kind of conceptualize what I think I want. Okay. So, and then I will send the data to along with the articles, to the printer and the layout and designers who they use something totally different. So I did not put together that particular infographic, but I gave them the data and said, let's do it like this. And so I kind of tell them what I want, and then they kind of do it. Does that make sense?
All right. Yes, thank you. Okay, well, we still have room for questions, but we also want to keep the webinar moving along, and we have another award winner to hear from. So I want to thank you, Gina and Elizabeth, for your presentation. And now I'd like to welcome from the Sisters of St. Joseph of Toronto, Lisa Tabachnick, who's their Director of Communications. And she received an award for Outstanding Achievement in Electronic Media on a campaign called Creativity of Love. So without further ado, please welcome Lisa.
Thanks, Rob. You almost have my last name correct. It's
Okay, I knew I was going to get
That's
that wrong. I
okay.
apologize.
You get 5 points. Thank you, CWR, for awarding our whole team. And I was saying before the webinar started, it's not just me. There were four of us, sort of 4.5 people working on this. I'm just the one who's talking about it. So great to recognize achievements and being able to share sort of creative tactics and what works and what doesn't with other people, because I find it fascinating. I love your magazine, Elizabeth and Gina, and I'm just obsessed with the layout. It just looks amazing, very professional. So we won, just as an overview. I'm going to just quickly share. I'm going to go back and forth between sharing and not sharing. I just put everything in one document. So I'm going to share my screen. So here's an overview of our winning social media campaign called the Creativity of Love, of course. And again, as I think I explained in either when we won the award, or this was highlighted in a similar CWR webinar about something else, but it was the Pope's Holy Week address that he used the term Creativity of Love to help us get through the pandemic. And that really sparked, I work with another communications person and then 2 people in our social justice department or ministry. And that really kind of gave us the impetus to create a campaign around those words and around that sentiment, around that feeling. So our objectives were, I'm just going to scroll up to kind of, even before the Pope said this, we were kind of talking about doing a digital media campaign. But we just weren't sure what the theme was going to be. So once he said that, and then everything kind of came together, we wanted to do something positive. We wanted to do something hopeful, and we wanted to have a clear objective, which was sharing ideas and sort of positive influences from not just faith groups, but from other countries, other regions, other ministries, anywhere that had sort of a positive, hopeful, social justice related tactic for making the world a better place, and specifically a just recovery after the pandemic. Because I'm sure all of you watching and in your ministries, social justice is kind of at the forefront of everything that the sisters do. So I'm just going to look at my document again. So we talked about, and we also had here, I'm going to just share my screen again. So another important aspect to this was the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which to be honest, didn't know a lot about. I had heard about them, but I hadn't delved into them that much before we started doing this campaign. So we tried to match, we had a different theme. We posted twice a week, 2 social media posts every week on Twitter and Facebook. And then we also shared those posts in our newsletters, our weekly sisters and staff newsletter and our monthly, sorry, our weekly Sisters and Associates newsletter and our monthly staff newsletter. And we had a theme for every week, and our social justice department came up with the theme. So like Gina and Elizabeth were saying, we tried to stick to one consistent just recovery theme, but depending on what current events were happening that time, whether it was that Black Lives Matters, whether it was something to do with LGBTQ, whether it was sort of a new current event that was happening related to gender equality, education, economic equality, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We kind of used a Google Doc as our master document, and we would, my social justice colleagues would decide what topic we were going to cover that week, what the post would look like, and then I would create a graphic to go along with their content in Canva. I really wanted to talk a lot about Canva because it's been a lifesaver for us. I don't know if any of you, I can't see the rest of you except for Rob, Gina, and Elizabeth, but I know Elizabeth's nodding her head. Canva is a free tool, so that's Canva, canva.com. That, yeah, and there's a paid version too, but there's no need to use the paid version unless you're kind of really going to get into the nitty gritty. There's lots you can do with the free Canva tool. So we created all of our graphics in Canva. Some were, most were just using photos or illustrations that Canva offers for free. Sometimes we would use artwork that the sisters created, that staff created, that associates created. We always use, I'm just going to go back to the overview here just to show you that we kept a consistent font and a consistent look and always put the logo. I think we almost always had the logo on the bottom. I think sometimes if the graphic didn't quite fit, we would put the logo at the top. But just like in a magazine or a, you know, television show, an ad, whatever, any branding, you want to be consistent in your look and your feel and your font and all of that. So that was important to us. And then I'm just going to go through sort of maybe more like tactical things that we did. So I mentioned we posted twice a week on Twitter and Facebook. We did all of the graphics in Canva. The four of us communicated via a master document in Google Docs, which worked really well, especially because we were working from home for the bulk of the campaign, which ran from May 1st to September 1st. We did do, like, I'll tell you maybe about some of the things that, not that didn't work per se, but we had a press release, but I kind of knew even when we created the press release, like it's not necessarily a newsworthy thing, but I thought, well, we'll just try. So we did get some quote unquote press in the Global Sisters report in Kairos, Canada, some of our partner organizations, the CRC, which is the Canadian Religious Conference, which was always a great partner, and they published some of our material. But really, we were just doing that to kind of get the word out more about like why we were doing this. And again, trying to have like positive, hopeful messages post-COVID. Does anyone, I still have more to say, but I'm just wondering, are there any questions specifically that anyone wants answered? Okay, so I see Lisa Martin said she would like to see the graphics up close. Let me see if I can do that while I'm still talking. I'll try to multitask here. Maybe while I'm looking for that, I also have a video I'm going to see if I can play, which is our wrap-up video. But here, let me just share my screen again. I just wanted to talk about how we monitored our success. So we use something called Meltwater. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Meltwater. It's we just bought it, I think 3 or 4 months ago. It's pretty cool. It's not only can you distribute press releases through that, but you can monitor your social media as well. You can put in search terms and they will send you reports of how often, say, so, oh, another important thing I should have mentioned was we use the Creativity of Love hashtag. So I monitored through Meltwater and through the free analytics in Twitter and Facebook, using the creativity of love hashtag. So if you, I think, yeah, you can see my screen. So I know it's a little hard to see. I tried to blow it up as big as possible, but this is May, June, July, and August. And I believe our total reach was over 100,000 reach, which is in Facebook speak, the amount of times that your post shows up on someone's feed. So that was cool. We did do sort of tried to compare with other campaigns, but I don't have, nor is it that important. It's just sort of more important internally. You know, we just kind of wanted to make sure we were on the right track and that it was being seen by people and it was being embraced by people. Obviously, you can tell by likes and comments. That's like an easy way to tell if your posts are being successful. But three things that I think like helped us really keep our heads in the game with this was using software like Google Drive so that all 4 or 5 of us could continuously collaborate. We didn't have to just be old school and have like a Word document on someone's desktop that was being passed around. To me, in order to stay on top of things and to see like the most updated version of something, you have to have sharing software. It doesn't have to be Google Docs. That's just kind of what worked for us. It could be something else, but it has to be something where everyone has access, even say you're working on the middle of the night, or I don't know, whatever, you're working off site or you're working from home, or you just need to access it quickly. Another thing, like I said, I can't speak more highly than about Canva. I've tried other graphics tools too, and I really do find that Canva is the best one. And again, it's free. I mean, you can't beat that. And then kind of always having our objective in mind, similar to, I think, what Elizabeth or Gina said about, well, obviously you guys, you did your editorial brainstorming first, but I'm sure as your writers are sending in their creations and your photographers are sending in their stuff and the graphics and you're pulling everything together, just kind of keeping that one theme or objective in mind, I found was helpful. So as we were creating content, as we were creating graphics, you know, as we were sharing stuff, just keeping in mind the Pope's words. We also used Laudato Si kind of as like an underlying message, and then sort of social justice ideals and Catholic social teaching ideals. Like, does all our content kind of meet those objectives? Does this graphic represent our underlying theme? Is it consistent? Are we using that consistent hashtag? Are people, like, is it resonating with our audience? And the great thing about social media is, unlike maybe a magazine or even an advertising campaign, you can tell immediately, almost immediately, if you're being successful or not successful. Like, and you can kind of see, oh, I wonder why this post got so many likes and comments, but this one didn't. And it's kind of neat to analyze that as well. Like, and then afterwards, I'll see if I can, I have still about 15 minutes, but I'm going to see if I can play our wrap up overview video for you. I don't think I've played a video while I'm speaking. So let me just see if this works. Oh, no, it's not going to. Maybe you can do that for me, Brian, or here, let's see if I can click. No, it's not working. Anyway, we have a wrap up video on YouTube. I can share the URL after, and it kind of just, again, is just an overview of what I'm saying. It's what our objectives were, why we wanted to do it, how we shared it, how we created it, were we successful, who we reached, and, you know, just sort of thanking people for kind of walking with us in this campaign and joining with us, and kind of keeping that inspiration and motivation and desire for having a hopeful solution to the pandemic. So that's kind of my overview in a nutshell. If people have questions, I'm happy to answer it, or we could maybe do like a little group chat here. Brian, I think, is going to try and share the video, or I can just share the URL afterwards.
Could I just add, it's just gorgeous. That campaign,
oh, thanks.
Gorgeous, Lisa. It's such a nice job.
Oh, thank you.
About Canva, I think that when Canva first came out, it was only, you could only use it on your phone, but now there is the desktop version, which has made all the difference. So yeah, I agree with you about Canva. It's incredible.
It is incredible. And they seem to be adding new things all the time. And I don't blame them. Like they have taken things away, but they need to do that. They need to make money too. So I do get that some things are subscriber only, but there's a million and one things you can do with the free version. And I like that it's accessible to everybody. You know, you don't have, and also, I mean, I'm fairly techie. I'm pretty good with graphics. I love art, but I'm not, you know, I didn't go to school to do graphic design, but yet you can create amazing graphics, and you can even embed videos into your posts. You can embed so many cool things. Like it's unbelievable. You could just go down a rabbit hole with Canva and be super creative. Let me just see, were there any? Usually we're such a chatty bunch, but I don't see any questions here. So Robert or Brian, I don't know if you want to do a
Yes, I
wrap-up?
can take it up from here. So,
Yeah.
you know, we still have a few minutes left in our hour. So if there are any other questions that pop up, you can throw it in the Q&A or in the chat below. Hopefully you're following that. The chat is also showing several links that Brian's been putting in there. And so, you know, as you may be thinking of some questions, I would like to share a little bit about the awards program, because we do intend to keep that going. And we will share more detail about that in the early part of 2021. But just generally, you know, we're looking at a similar program to what we offered last year. So there are 3 categories. 2 of them were shared today. So in print, so any printed material, including a feature story or annual report, magazine, newsletter, flyer, brochure, postcard, mailer, all that kind of work. That's one of our categories. Electronic media includes videos, podcasts, blogs, social media platforms, and your website. So that's quite a wide variety of content that could be submitted for an achievement. And there's also the integrated campaign. So you're looking at multiple forms of media through ads and print and audio and social media work and video. Those are the 3 award categories that we're looking at. And you can think of submissions coming around May and June. That's typically, or that's what we did in the previous year. We expect that to happen again. We'll have an independent group of judges looking at all of the entries. There are entry requirements. So there'll be a date range that you'll submit your work from. There's an entry fee for each submission, and at least half the work should be done in-house. So it's not like, hey, you got this idea and someone else completely brought it to realization. We should be doing it on our own. And that's the general idea. And we'll announce award winners at the next conference. So be thinking about that as you're planning your work ahead. And we will keep building toward more excellent communications. So, all right. Still no other questions, so I'll keep rambling here a little bit and also tease our next webinar, which is from another pair of award winners for integrated campaign, Marcia and Gina from the Felician Sisters. And they will be presenting communications and development, strategic planning and collaboration. So they will talk about their work as well as some more broad strategic planning where mission advancement or development and communications are working together. And we hope that'll appeal to a lot of our members. So still no questions, but we'll keep going. We don't have to end right at the top of the hour, but just to share one other thing, there will be a survey that follows the webinar, and also the recording today will be available later on the CWR website.
Can I add something that somebody asked really quick?
Certainly.
Somebody asked how much we take in from imagineONE. So while we were talking, I asked our database person, and she said so far from our fall 2020 magazine, we've taken in 33,000. And that's kind of consistent. It sort of just pays for itself. I'm not going to say we make a huge amount, but that's not the purpose of the magazine to begin with. So I just wanted to
And
answer that
actually, Rob, there was a question. I'm not sure who Marcia, if you see it's Marcia Wallander, what's next for long-term planning for social media? I don't know if that was directed at me or CWR. I actually, just on that note, we do have campaigns, but it would be interesting to kind of think like long-term about social media too. Sometimes you have to be flexible and react to like a world event or something the Pope said or what have you. But, and we do plan certain campaigns, but I think as social media gets more and more popular and more present in everyone's life, it almost maybe will supersede other forms of communication and become even more important. So I'm not exactly sure what Marcia was asking, but long-term planning for social media is very important, obviously.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa. We'll hold it open for just a moment, but I think people are just really witnessing what you've had to offer today, and thank you to all of our presenters